And I think we are good to go. So again, welcome. I'm going to start out by introducing all of our panelists. So Dr. Paul Bilinski is a professor of biology at West Shore Community College. He earned his BS and MS in ecology from the University of California at San Diego and his PhD in plant biology at UC Davis. Today, Dr. Bilinski utilizes his training to help folks navigate complex biological topics, such as how the COVID-19 vaccines are different from previous vaccines and how they work. Jessica Hauser has a Master of Arts in Psychology from the University of West Georgia. She worked in teaching and advising at Eastern Gateway Community College in Ohio for 5 years before coming to West Shore. This is her 4th year as our full-time psychology professor. Dr. Jennifer Morse is the medical director for the Central Michigan District, Mid-Michigan District, and District 10 Health Departments. She's a doctor of medicine, fellow of the American Academy of Family Physicians, and has a master's in public health. Greg Stewart graduated from Ferris State University with his pharmacy degree in 1998 and has worked at the Ludington Walgreens for almost 21 years as a staff pharmacist. So those are all of our wonderful panelists. And I think, so what we're gonna do is they're gonna talk for maybe like 5 to 7 minutes just to give their overview of their topic area, and then we'll have time for question and answer at the end, plenty of time for that. But to start us off, I'd like to start with Dr. Morse, just because she can give us, I think, the broadest picture of the vaccines coming from the health departments as she does. So Dr. Morse, why don't you take it away? Oops, you're muted.
Too many technical problems tonight. So I put together a few slides just kind of going over just the public health perspective of vaccine allocation, because I knew we had others talking about the vaccines themselves. And I know that's something that there's a lot of questions about. So I'll just pull up my presentation here. And I think I need. All right. So, sorry.
No, that's good.
Just really quickly, I don't want to kill everybody with slides.
It's always good to have a visual.
Yeah. But just briefly, District Health Department number 10 is where Ludington is covered by, and that's a 10-county health department. There's 45 health departments in Michigan, and the city of Detroit is its own health department. So there's several health departments that are multi-county. Our health department has given so far a total of just over 36,000 vaccines. 23,000 of those have been first dose and 12,000 of those have been second doses. And that's as of the 27th. And likely it's not 100% accurate because we have to, get certain things entered in. But that's just through the health department itself. If you look at the state website, you'll see that the doses administered based on where a person lives for our 10 counties has been around 64,000, and about a third of those vaccines have been second doses. So for us at the health department, we record them based on where they were administered. So when you look at, Kalkaska County dose, that was based on where we administered it. And when the state counts it, it's based on where you live. So that's where one of the ways that sometimes the numbers are a little bit different. If you live in Kalkaska County, but you work in Mason County, we might vaccinate you in Mason County, but it gets counted a little differently. So just how we've been doing with our health department, we've been vaccinating most days of the week, including Saturday in most of our counties since the end of December. We're going to be changing based on some state initiatives, trying to plan really large, more centralized vaccination clinics in areas that are really based on what's most centrally strategic for our our clients and our patients based on where other pharmacies may have vaccines, or health care centers have vaccines, to try to make that easy for everybody. We just found out that, there's a press conference that went out statewide starting on Monday. They're expanding the eligibility so that those that are over 50 with medical conditions can get vaccinated. And on the 22nd, they're expanding it then to anyone who's over 50. In our area, I just found this out at like 5:30, and I haven't gotten full confirmation for District 10. I know Central Michigan is right next door to District 10, and I know that they tend to follow the same changes. So it's very likely that very, very soon, if not immediately, pretty much the whole tip of the mitt will be transitioning to just vaccinating anyone who's 50 and above, regardless of health conditions, and also progressing to eligible essential workers. Just because we are getting to a point where we're not buried in a wait list anymore and we have openings in our clinics, we want to make sure we're getting people vaccinated. So again, statewide, these are the new expansions that are happening, but from Central Michigan, so Isabella County North, you'll likely see that we're going to move even faster with things. I don't have specifics just because, like I said, I got one phone call at 5:30 and I haven't been able to confirm the specifics. So you'll have to just watch for that news to be coming out. The ways you sign up in our area is if you go to dhed10.org/COVID-19-vaccine, there's different links based on the category you're in, but basically there's a link you just click on that says waitlist registration link, and that is putting you on a list, and then people at our offices will call you to get you signed up as we get enough vaccine to vaccinate. If you're older and you have any troubles with utilizing internet access or don't have internet access, as so many of us struggle with in rural areas, you can call, and we have a phone number here for you should you need that. You can also go to a national resource called vaccinefinder.org. And right at the top of that page, there's a link you can click on called Find COVID-19 Vaccines. You just enter in your zip code. Be mindful that it's defaulted to only search for 10 miles around you, which again, for us in Northern Michigan, you often have to look a little bit further away from you. So just change the miles you're willing to drive, and it'll look for everywhere that has vaccine, whether it's a pharmacy or an FQHC healthcare facility or the health department that has vaccine around you. And then again, for anyone who doesn't have internet or needs help, you can call the state hotline, you can call 211, so there's hopefully no one finds that they're having trouble getting help scheduling. So our goals, we really want to get 70% of all Michiganders vaccinated ASAP. Really, that might be into the fall or the end of the year, but we're hoping to get through as quickly as possible. Once we get our vaccines, which we get, a new batch every week, we try to get all of them gone within 7 days of arrival, and we pretty much do that without exception. We want to get everyone their second dose as quickly as we can within that 3 to 4 weeks, depending on the vaccine type. There are some issues. Sometimes people get sick. Sometimes people go to Florida. Sometimes
Right.
people have different thoughts, and there's delays. We want to make sure there's not any disparities in access to vaccine based on, if you're in a rural area without transportation, language barriers, things like that. And we want to make sure that no one has to drive more than 20 minutes to find a vaccine. So the path that the vaccine has to go through, one, it has to be made. And there's only 3 companies making vaccine. It's very complicated, and there's a lot of quality control, a lot of batch checking. You don't want it rushed. You don't want it to be ineffective. You don't want it to be contaminated. So it is a long process to make new vaccine. The vaccine is then allocated by the federal government. They batch out how much each state will get. The allocation to pharmacies is done at a federal level. Allocations to tribal nations, things like that, is then sent out, and then states themselves determine how they will divide it up from that point. Then once that happens, as it's being used up, then we order how much we want, and then our states will order how much they want from the CDC through an ordering system. There might be times where they don't want their full allocation that they're allowed. Once we order it, it gets shipped to us. It gets shipped directly to us where we need it, because the less it's shipped, the safer. And then the final step is we have to administer it. And it's a lot of planning to make sure it's administered safely and quickly and according to the plans that have been determined to be the most effective and ethical to get it to everybody. So how do we decide who gets vaccinated first? There's actually been a lot of talk and meetings and discussions and worldwide think tanks to decide this. And there's actually been decision-making like this well preceding COVID, just on how we would ever allocate like influenza vaccine if there were a pandemic, things like that. So you really just have to maximize your benefits and minimize your harms. You want to make sure you take into mind any health inequities. So again, if you have populations that have hardships, are more likely to suffer from disease or access issues, you have to keep that in mind. You want to make sure it's just and fair and ethical, and you want to be transparent about it. So I do have a link on here. The Advisory Committee for Immunization Practices, which is made up of committee members that are all non-governmental. They're scientists, they're educators, they're very intelligent people, had very good discussions about this and presented very good data and science behind how they made these decisions. And their slides are available, the recording of their talks are available, and it was really good discussion of how they decided who will vaccinate first and why. So this is the allocation plan, the vaccination plan for the state. It keeps getting adjusted. So for example, we have the 65 to 74-year-olds. Well, then we went down to 60 and then down to 50. So we kind of keep adjusting things, trying to figure out the best way to adjust that, because we have openings, but we don't have enough to say open it up to all of the people over 18 with health risks. So the state's trying to find ways to nudge the door open a little bit more, but not have a floodgate where we have a lot of people wanting vaccine and we just don't have quite enough for it. So this is the plan as it stands. And again, we're right here right now, but we are, like I said, we are adding in 50 and above and some additional frontline essential workers. How does the state determine who gets vaccine in the state? The population in each county that's within the allocation groups is determined. And then there are adjustments made based on the social vulnerability index. The social vulnerability index is a tool that the CDC developed to help actually with determining allocations of aid during emergency situations. So this predates COVID, and it takes into account 15 different things. I won't read through all of them, but different things that we know put populations at risk. Socioeconomic factors we know really do affect how well people do with their health and how long they live. There was a study that was published with JAMA that showed that people who were in lower socioeconomic areas with a lower social vulnerability index had higher COVID incidence and higher mortality. So really suggesting that we need to address those inequities if we're going to make an impact in those areas. So that's where Michigan has made it ends up being a pretty minor adjustment. I'm not going to read through all this, but this is actually from a publicly available document that explains how that social vulnerability index is used to adjust our vaccine allotment. As an example, when we were doing the 65 and over and the frontline workers, which was educators and law enforcement, first responders, the population in our 10 counties was around 50,000. Our social vulnerability index multiplier was 1.8. If you do the math it's kind of a complicated thing, but if you do the math, let's say the state got 400,000 doses that week, we would have then been given 11,600 doses. If you had not taken the social vulnerability index into account, we would have gotten 11,780. So for us, it really doesn't change it that much at all, because our counties, we have some counties that have a really poor social vulnerability index and some that are a little higher, so it pretty much balances it out. So that's all I had really. Just again, I wanted to kind of give the public health standpoint. I could talk all day about the vaccines themselves, but I'll leave that to our other experts, and just kind of the angle that I think is a little more unique to public health. So.
Yeah, thank you so much. There's so much good information there and so much detail to it that we don't really get to hear when we're just hearing like news headlines, like the social vulnerability index. I had no idea that was a thing. So that's really interesting. Cool, thank you. Dr. Bilinski, did you want to talk about vaccines and what they do?
Yeah, sure. So sorry, Dr. Morse, to maybe have stolen your thunder there, but as a biology teacher, I can't not teach biology. So also feel free to chime in if at any point I'm maybe oversimplifying something or kind of, I don't know, if you have other input on what my little demo I've got going on here. So just like you would if you were in one of my classes, I'll be sharing my screen here of my iPad. Hopefully y'all see this.
Yeah.
Cool. So I wanted to give everyone a little bit of background about the general idea of how the SARS-CoV-2 vaccine works. And more broadly speaking, kind of how vaccines work in the first place, because I think it's kind of really important to understand the basic biology behind how things work. So that way you can better tune your questions and really understand what's going on with yourself. Because ultimately, you are the person that's monitoring your own health throughout all of this. And the better data that you can collect on your own health, the better decisions you can make. So with that, let's talk real quick about this virus that I'm sure y'all have seen many a time before. So this is my poor illustration of the SARS-CoV-2 virus, really accenting two things on it. Y'all probably recognize the spike proteins. Those are the surface coating proteins on the virus itself that our body is going to be trying to design antibodies for. That is the search pattern that our body wants to identify and destroy. Now, inside of this virus, there is an RNA molecule. Y'all may be familiar with DNA. It's fairly similar, just has some structural differences, but ultimately it's its genetic code. So what happens when the SARS-CoV-2 virus gets inside one of us, and that is a person? Two things kind of happen simultaneously. I like to think of them as a little race between two well-drawn automobiles. The first is cell death. As the virus infects cells, it's going to take them over. It's going to convince them to make more viruses, proliferate itself. And in doing so, it's going to blow up a bunch of your own cells. And cell death has a whole bunch of side effects inside of us. Things like tissue damage. Some of y'all may have heard of the loss of smell or taste that occurs in some folks who get COVID. These are some of the things that the virus itself is doing. Now, ultimately, if the virus was to run unchecked, your immune system was never alerted, and it continued to do its thing, that would result in the death of the person because it damages too many tissues. In many cases, the lungs begin to fail. That's why you've heard so much about ventilators with COVID. And we really want to do everything we can to protect against that. So at the same time that the cell death thing is happening, you have your own body response, your immune response, in particular, antibody design. And maybe you've seen antibodies before. This, again, is my little cartoon of them. They're oftentimes little Y-shaped things that have very different chemical motifs here. So maybe you're familiar with positive and negative charges, different chemistry of different ions and the like. And so those regions of the Y are going to need to be shuffled around up until they stick to the spike protein well. Once we find an antibody, once our body designs an antibody that is sticking to the spike protein well, we now have something that can attack, identify, and start to eliminate it. And so there's actual side effects in that immune response that your body is instigating. Things like fever are oftentimes instigated by ourselves. You might get muscle pain, some other things. Again, slightly an oversimplification here, but there are components of that immune response that you are doing that you associate with being sick. So what's with this antibody design? Well, why is it that our bodies take so long? Well, you can imagine it as though you're trying to hit a target and you're blind. So at first, you're trying to feel your way around it and see where the center of the target is. Well, one of the problems with SARS-CoV-2 is that our body hasn't really encountered other things like it. So our antibody design is so bad, it's off screen, it's off the page. So it'll take us a while to walk slowly but surely up until we hit something good enough. Now, in that entire time that your body is working towards that ideal antibody, the cell death car, well, it's going forward. The antibody design car is trying to hit the finish line before it gets there, and hopefully you beat the car to the finish line. So where does a vaccine play in all of this? Well, a vaccine, ideally, or in these cases, is something that's going to cause the cell death car to stay in the garage and the antibody design car to get there in its own time frame. In our cases, whether you're looking at the Moderna vaccine, the Pfizer vaccine, or the new Johnson & Johnson vaccine, they all operate on very similar principles. They're trying to give you an RNA molecule for the spike protein, or a DNA molecule in Johnson & Johnson's case. They give you the blueprint for the thing that you need to recognize, but they don't go around blowing up all of your cells in the same way that SARS-CoV-2 does. So your body will experience some side effects because, again, that antibody design is doing its own thing. That's typical of the side effects with vaccines in general. But now you've got the time to design a good enough antibody. In some cases, maybe you've heard Johnson & Johnson's, ideally 1 dose. With Moderna and Pfizer, you're looking at probably 2 doses. Though, again, there's some evidence to suggest maybe some variability with that. I think that that's still what's being prescribed. You get the time you need without your cells blowing up to design that perfect antibody. So that way, the next time when this race starts over, because you get exposed to SARS-CoV-2, and I think it's important to understand that the idea with vaccines is not to prevent you from getting sick in the first place. You can still be exposed to it, and maybe you can still contract it. I think there's inconclusive evidence on that front. But what we do know is that your antibodies design car has a huge head start on things. It is much, much closer to having that perfect antibody, so that way your immune response doesn't spend so long searching. And so that's kind of my little silly demo on this. I hope it makes some sense on what a vaccine is supposed to do. I hope y'all connect the fact that this is why you do get side effects with the vaccine. There are things that you are instigating an immune response. And if your immune system's working, it will instigate a fever. It will have some side effects. That's normal. And I think once you understand kind of what's normal and what's not normal, you can better go into what to expect when getting vaccinated.
Thank you so much. That was really, really helpful. Now I'm just going to imagine like little cars like floating in my bloodstream or something. Yeah. That was really great. Okay. So I think next we're going to have Jessica Hauser talk about vaccine hesitancy. So take it away, Jessica.
Okay. Give me a second here. I too have a PowerPoint.
Sure.
Alrighty. Mine is not as like fancy as Jennifer's and Paul's. I mean, Paul's is like got the whole animated thing there, and there's like all these fancy charts, and Jennifer's, so I'm kind of jealous. So I was asked to come here tonight and talk about COVID-19 vaccination hesitancy. So in this group, I'm kind of the odd one out in that I'm the social scientist, whereas everyone else here, you're the hard scientist. So thank you for including me. So anyway, I have a quote for you to start off. It doesn't matter how great your biomedical innovation is. If people aren't convinced to use that innovation, then the innovation has no impact at all. That is a quote from Dr. Gregory Stewart, a psychologist who studies vaccine decision-making at Indiana University. Regarding the COVID-19 vaccine, psychologists are trying to find answers to important questions like who doesn't want the vaccine, why are people hesitant, and how do we convince people to get the vaccine? I want to start off by talking about, why people or who doesn't want to get the vaccine. Let me bump that slide there. So some of the anti-vaccination sentiments are old hat. The anti-vaccination movement has been around since 1796 when Edward Jenner invented the smallpox vaccine. Even then, people had reasons for not getting vaccinated. Some people cite religion, some express a distrust of science, others express concerns over side effects. There is, after all, a small risk, as Paul said, with some vaccinations, like medical treatments like vaccinations, you can have some side effects. Our current anti-vaccination movement, the one that is trending now, predates COVID-19. It is often cited as beginning in 1998 when a former UK doctor, Andrew Wakefield, published research linking autism spectrum disorder to the measles, mumps, and rubella, otherwise known as MMR vaccine. Wakefield's research has never been replicated by other scientists. The health science community has conducted many investigations, but none of those investigations have found a causal link between autism and the MMR vaccine. Wakefield's research was flawed in many ways, including the fact that during the course of his research, he was guilty of several ethical violations, such as manipulating data, the potential to profit monetarily from his research, and conducting unnecessary and unauthorized tests on children. After an in-depth investigation, the General Medical Council revoked Andrew Wakefield's medical license. The paper he had co-authored in 1998 was retracted and is no longer part of the scientific community. This was in 2010 and is all public record. Yet the anti-vaccination movement persists, and there are people who still believe Wakefield's research is correct. A Pew Research survey conducted in 2015 found that 9% of 1,000 US respondents were against the MMR vaccine. While that survey asked specifically about the MMR vaccine, a pre-pandemic 2018 survey conducted by the Gallup World Poll measured vaccination opinions of 140,000 people in 140 countries. In response to the statement, vaccines are safe, 11% of US citizens said they strongly disagree or somewhat disagree. So 11% of US citizens question the safety of vaccines. Comparing this to a few other countries, just to give us a basis of comparison, 9% of respondents in the UK and 9% of respondents in Ireland question the safety of vaccines. Regarding the COVID-19 vaccine, I'm sure you've heard many statistics about the percentage of people who are hesitant or unwilling to get vaccinated. Psychologists have been tracking vaccination attitudes since spring 2020. In September, a national Gallup poll indicated that 63% of people expressed a willingness to get vaccinated. Henry J. Kaiser Family Foundation survey taken in September put a willingness to be vaccinated at 71%. According to that survey, the main concerns of the 27% who probably would not or definitely would not get a COVID-19 vaccine are, as you can see on my PowerPoint, concerns about possible side effects, distrust in government's ability to ensure the vaccine is effective and safe. The vaccine is new, so some people want to wait and see how well it works for others, and then concern that politics played too much of a role in vaccine development. The belief that the risk of COVID-19 is exaggerated is another factor. Research conducted in the UK and Ireland had similar findings. 65% of the Irish population and 69% of the UK population are fully willing to accept the vaccine. The rest of the population is resistant or hesitant. In the UK and Ireland, regardless of demographic, people who are vaccine hesitant or resistant express distrust in authority figures, including scientists, healthcare professionals, and governments. Other reasons, such as conspiracy theories and religious beliefs, were also factors. The distrust certainly lines up with surveys conducted in the US. And looking at those surveys, trust, or rather a sense of mistrust, keeps popping up. So in answering the question, why don't people want to get vaccinated? Trust in authority figures and concerns about vaccine efficacy and side effects are major factors. Some of this is human nature. Experiencing anxiety and fear in the midst of uncertainty is normal. We all know this pandemic has created a lot of uncertainty and upheaval. But the fear and mistrust are exasperated by a number of socio-cultural factors like political climate and the plethora of misinformation circulating on social media. A number of the social science studies have honed in on the distrust that's been created through misinformation. I don't have to tell you how much misinformation is on social media. Social media has been mostly unregulated, so we're all quite familiar with misinformation issues. But when it comes to COVID-19 and the COVID-19 vaccine, the stakes are higher. The misinformation could lead to choices that have serious negative consequences. Perhaps Joseph Stalin was right when he said the death of one is a tragedy, the death of a million is a statistic. Several months ago, social media posts circulated with the claim that CDC reported that COVID-19 has a 0.2% fatality rate. The CDC never reported that as a known fact. That number came from a CDC report that includes fatality rate estimates. 0.2% was the best case scenario. Many people on social media responded to this misinformation by claiming the risk of COVID-19 is exaggerated. If you remember, that's one of the concerns on the vaccination hesitancy survey. Even though the information is misleading, we can still note that 0.2% of 328 million is 656,000. So it's not quite a million, but it's a lot. For some time now, psychologists have wondered if there are certain groups of people who are more inclined to believe health misinformation. So studies on this predate the current pandemic. Most research tends to point to 4 factors. As you can see on this slide, there is the deficit hypothesis. People with less education or less health literacy are more likely to believe misinformation on health-related topics. Health-related attitudes is a major factor. People who have more positive attitudes towards alternative medicine are more inclined to have to believe in health misinformation. Trust, as we've already discussed, some people mistrust the healthcare system and other authority figures. And then the last one, cognitive miserliness. This is a social psychology, cognitive psychology term. This is true of everyone. In psychology, it's understood to be a reluctance to do too much thinking. We're constantly being bombarded with information. There are so many things going on that it's difficult to scrutinize everything. This is especially true in social media contexts. One study I found showed that we are worse at identifying misinformation if it is presented in a social media context. People are distracted by other things like baby pictures and how many likes and shares a particular post gets. If a post gets 1 million likes, it must be true, right? Regarding the other 3 factors, the deficit hypothesis, health-related attitudes, and trust, this year a group of health psychologists researched those factors and published a paper on the topic. The researchers wanted to know if certain groups of people believe misinformation on multiple health topics. The participants were asked to view information on statins, the HPV vaccine, and cancer, and they found that people who are likely to believe one type of health misinformation were also likely to believe other categories of health misinformation. Those people fell into the 3 categories of mistrust, health-related attitudes, and the deficit hypothesis. So what do we do? Campaigns to educate people about health issues have a mixed history with varying outcomes. Some psychologists speculate that the education route may have some success because of the novelty of COVID-19. So we're here in this panel. The situation is fluid and we're all learning new information about COVID-19 every day. In one psychological study that investigated misinformation on COVID-19, the researchers found that people are more susceptible to misinformation about COVID-19 because of its novelty. So getting the correct information out there may be effective. On the other side of that, we need to combat misinformation. The World Health Organization, the WHO, has a page containing directions on ways to report misinformation on social media. The page link is on this slide. While on social media, we need to be careful about the type of information we're sharing. Psychologists have known for some time, once a belief is formed, it tends to persist. Given that trust appears to be a major factor, it doesn't help to force opinions on other people or shame them. People who are hesitant or resist the vaccine, shaming them, as I said, isn't effective. For one, a lot of information has an element of truth. Rarely is it completely fabricated. Secondly, people have legitimate concerns. We were told by the experts, for example, that it would take well over a year to create a new vaccine. It took less than a year. So understandably, people have questions. Third, there are some people who have been advised not to get the vaccine because of health issues. So we need to be sensitive to that. Lastly, research tends to show that if people are pushed too hard where they feel like they don't have a choice, they become reactive and then they may be even less willing to get vaccinated. So really, and those points that I made come from things that I've read from the APA. So I would say we have to meet people where they are and listen to their concerns and address those concerns with honesty and correct information. And then, oops, there we go. So, and then those are my references. So thank you.
Wow, that's so interesting. So many good new social scientist terms and everything, and a ton of really good information in there about how people think and maybe how we can address some of these things with people that we know, or ways that we can combat misinformation ourselves too. That's really helpful. Okay, Greg Stewart, would you please tell us about the vaccines from a pharmacist perspective?
Yeah, for sure.
Thank you.
So as of 2009, every state allows pharmacists or pharmacies to administer vaccines. So as since 2009, pharmacies have been becoming a major player in supplementing the delivery of these vaccines. Of course, it started with flu. That was the big one. In Michigan, in Ludington anyway, we started in 2008. And because we're such a tourist town, stores in the Ludington or Mason County area tend to lead the state in volume as far as vaccines go. And we're kind of anticipating that with the summer influx of a lot of out-of-towners who haven't got a COVID vaccine. This is going to be a prime time to help vaccine those as well. So kind of starting from my experience, when we started giving them in 2008, a lot of it has to do with the integrity of the vaccine. You have to get it from the manufacturer to the pharmacy and to the arm without any degradation in the vaccine. The COVID vaccines, of course, are pretty cantankerous. They're very temperature sensitive. So we kind of break it down into three things as far as our process goes: distribution, storage, and processing of each vaccine. Everything's there. We've been doing this for over a decade. All pharmacies, all retail pharmacies have some component of given vaccine in the past. So we have the infrastructure. As far as distribution, we utilize FedEx, UPS, Post Office, intercompany freight. During flu season, we'll get 2 or 3 coolers full of vaccine every week. So the infrastructure to get it to the pharmacy is there. As far as the software, we have inventory software. It's real time. I mean, it'll send out vaccines to the stores that need it based on the previous day's vaccine administration. So everything's there in place. We're ready to do the COVID vaccine. It just gets a little complicated from there. As far as storage, we have dedicated refrigerators, freezers that are monitored 24/7. It's part of the requirements for pharmacies to give the vaccine. We have a third party that actually monitors our temperatures in each unit, and will notify the company, who notifies the store manager, who will take steps to ensure that integrity of those vaccines are not compromised. One note is the new the Pfizer vaccine has to be stored long term at 70 degrees below zero, and that's Celsius. It's like negative 95 degrees Fahrenheit. And that's for long-term storage up to 6 months. We actually have one of those units ready to go in Ludington. It'll hold up to 10,000 doses, but it's sat empty since January. We're just waiting on everything. As far as the Johnson & Johnson and Moderna, those are more stable. Those can be in a regular freezer, 0 to 5 degrees Fahrenheit, negative 5 degrees Fahrenheit. And we have dedicated units for all this. I mean, you can't have food or drink or anything in those storage places, but they're ready to go. We've been using them for a decade now. I mean, we're ready for it, and it's just a matter of rolling this out a lot quicker. As far as the Pfizer goes, we actually also have dedicated coolers full of dry ice. If the power to go out tonight and notify the store manager, we have dry ice to put that vaccine on and actually transport it to the nearest facility that can store it. So nothing goes to waste. I mean, everything is efficient. The protocol's there. We're just waiting on the vaccine to get there. The third component in all vaccines is the actual processing. And this is where I think pharmacies can really shine. as far as volume goes. Every single vaccine that's administered has to have a VAR sheet or vaccine administration record. It's filled out by the customer. It's gone over with the vaccinator. And that also has to be uploaded into the state's, it's called MICR, Michigan Care Improvement Registry, who keeps track of all vaccines. So not only do you have to get the people in, give them the shot, you can't just stop there. You have to upload all that information into the state's registry. And that way all healthcare providers can look and see what patients and customers have and have not gotten, especially with the two-shot system. Before COVID, we've had one vaccine called Shingrix for shingles. It's a two-shot process. Because of MICR and because of the ease to look this stuff up, you don't have to go back to the same pharmacy to get your second shot. It's easy to follow up at any pharmacy. We can look it up. If you've gotten it elsewhere, we can look it up and proceed with the second shot if appropriate. So even the two-shot system is ready to go in most pharmacies. And that brings me to the piece of the puzzle that will entertain the most questions. If we're ready to go, why aren't we? Why aren't we doing 300 or 400 shots a day? So before the vaccine actually rolled out, there's something called the Federal Retail Pharmacy Program that the government had set up. They realized, yes, pharmacies are a big player, but because of the COVID vaccine, because of the restrictions, the different tiers that we're starting out with, they have to control that, which is understandable. So all these pharmacies enrolled in this program. I think there's 88,000 pharmacies, give or take, across the U.S. Over half have enrolled in this program. To enroll in this program, you have to prove or meet the requirements that the government sets out, which is the distribution, the storage, the correct processing. So all these pharmacies are ready to go. The problem is the tier system. We can't maybe control it as much as local government can as far as who gets it based on age. That's the easy one. But health conditions, employment records, we can't babysit who comes in and says, hey, I'm a healthcare worker. We're not sure. We can't prove that. So that's the big hurdle right now. Once these tiers start opening up and it's a broader range of the public who's able to get them, then we're there. We're going to be ready to go. Unlike other vaccines, pharmacies will purchase those vaccines and dispense them themselves. COVID is all government. They developed it. They paid to develop it. They bought all the vaccines, and they're the ones that are distributing it. So we're kind of at the mercy of first federal government, and then state, and then local as far as distribution. So that's kind of where we're sitting. We're ready to go. We have everything in place. I think there's nationwide, there's 250,000 trained pharmacists, plus tens of thousands of trained technicians now. We're able to train technicians to get vaccines. So the efficiency, the programs are set up. We're ready to go. It's just a matter of getting the vaccine in. President Biden was recently at a FEMA vaccine center down in Texas, I think about a week ago. And he was mentioning how many millions of vaccines are purchased and ready to be distributed. Like Dr. Morse was saying, it's not as easy as just sending them out equal to each state. There's a lot of thought that goes into who gets how many and how much at first. So I guess we're just kind of along for the ride until that gets here. But he had mentioned it's one thing to have the vaccine, it's another to have vaccinators. Where we're here sitting, it's one thing to have vaccinators, it's another to have the vaccine. So we're ready to go. We can do all three. We got all pharmacies should be able to administer all three vaccines. As far as the Pfizer goes, once it's out of that deep freeze, it's good for 6 days. So you can easily transport that to rural areas, and you have 6 days to give that vaccine in regular refrigerator storage. So the knowledge is there. We're just waiting on when we can get this vaccine and get it distributed. And then I think it'll go a lot faster. I think you'll see those tiers start to fall off. And President Biden did say we're way ahead of schedule on this. So I think once it goes live for everybody, it's just a matter of time before we hit that herd immunity percentage. And hopefully retail will have a big part of that.
Sounds like it. Yeah. Yeah, you're ready to go.
We are.
And it sounds like with things loosening up a little bit in Michigan in terms of who is going to be eligible, maybe that will kind of get the ball rolling too for different distributors.
Yes.
That's great. Oh my gosh, thank you so much. We've had like a ton of information shared. This is great. Thank you all so much. Let's look at some questions. Okay, so looks like our first one that came in, I have acquaintances all over 65 years old that have gotten both of their vaccine shots. They feel I should be able to join them for dinner of 6 or on a table because they are all safe. I have not been able to get the vaccine yet. Opinions?
I would say that there might be protected, but you are still not because you haven't got the shot. It's a personal kind of a personal choice. You got to remember though, if you go and you're not protected and you happen to come down with it, you could affect the people that you're living with as well.
Sure.
So it's still a personal choice.
And just because they're 95% affected, you could unknowingly go there, even if you're not symptomatic, and expose them. And we've already had some people infected, even though they're more than 2 weeks past vaccination. So it does.
Oh, really?
So even
Okay.
though they think they're protected, for them to invite a non-vaccinated person into their home could unwillingly put them at risk. So I think she's very wise to be concerned, and I think we're a little premature to go bananas right now. So we need to be slow and cautious, and then ease into things. So.
Yeah, so somebody had asked me earlier, why do we still have to wear masks even after we get the full course of vaccinations, like both vaccinations?
So kind of for the same reason I just said, it's 95% effective. For the 2-shot series, the Johnson & Johnson data is a little bit lower, but they're not compared head to head. So it's kind of comparing apples to oranges.
Okay.
But if you had, 20 people in a room together and, one was infected, you could still then have one of those 20 vaccinated people get infected. Like I said, we have seen some vaccine failures, not a ton yet, but we don't have a ton of people vaccinated. And the one I'm thinking of right now, had some comorbidities, had some health problems. The other issue is we're dealing with the unknowns of variants right now. We have the B117 in Michigan, and it's just really exploding. We have well over 400 cases that we know of, and I'm sure there's tons more that we don't know of. From what we know is that the vaccines we have now are likely pretty effective against the B117. But the South African variant, we know is not as well protected by some of the vaccines, and the Brazilian variant, we're still kind of finding things out about that. And those are in the US. We haven't found any in Michigan yet, but that's why, wearing masks is important. That's why not traveling is still really a big recommendation that a lot of people don't realize. And I know spring break is right around the corner, but, traveling out of the country, but even just to Florida or other states where there's a lot of activity is, we in public health are not looking forward to April. So I'm kind of nervous about what might come back into Michigan, but we just have to get, through this hump and make sure that we get enough herd immunity and that we know what these new variants are going to do for us. So.
Got it. So stay vigilant, keep the mask on.
And I do think, and correct me if I'm wrong about this, Dr. Morse, but the Johnson & Johnson vaccine did trials, both, they were tested both against the South African and the Brazilian variants. And so that, like, if I remember right, that there may have the lower efficacy associated with it may have been because of strain evolution. Is that correct?
So part of their studies were done in South Africa and Brazil. And I actually have the numbers right here. So it was 74% effective against all symptomatic infection in the US, 66% effective in Brazil. And they found that a good majority of the cases were the P2 variant, and 52% effective in South Africa, and nearly all the cases in the study were the B1351 variant. So it wasn't terribly less effective, which I think is good, but there were slight decreases in efficacy.
And if I can squeeze a question in here, regarding the other variants, my understanding is that those are specifically tracking substitutions in the spike protein chain, correct? We're not really, like, those are the ones that we cared the most about because that's what we're trying to design our vaccines against. Cool.
Yep. So they all have spike protein variants. And so, we worry about our polyclonal and monoclonal treatments. There's been concerns that past infection isn't as protective, and but definitely with the B117, what we're seeing, I mean, it's definitely more communicable. So,
yeah, and I guess from an evolutionary biologist perspective, which is kind of more my background, you're really, if there's one change, you might be still good enough to stick to it. But if one strain can accumulate more and more mutations, then all of a sudden you shift away from something that your antibody was designed for. And now all of a sudden you thought you were aiming at that target, but you're again off it. And so we really want to try to nip this in the bud to prevent that continuous strain evolution for ticking more and more changes.
And Moderna is already working on a South African vaccine. So that's nice, but to me, it's kind of not too optimistic, but anyway.
Let's see. So someone had asked about the differences between the three vaccines. Are there differences such that, would you say like, oh, I only want to get, the J&J vaccine, I don't want to get Pfizer or Moderna?
And I'm happy to hit on that real quickly. But the big difference is the Pfizer and Moderna are 2 doses. The Johnson & Johnson is 1 dose. The Pfizer and Moderna, again, these are not head-to-head studies, but the Johnson & Johnson does seem to have a little bit less side effect issue. The Pfizer and Moderna is a little more heavy on the side effects. Maybe, that's what the studies have shown, but we'll see how people end up reacting to it. Storage for us on, the pharmacy side and the public health side, storage is much different, and the Johnson & Johnson is likely going to be really helpful for us, as we're doing homebound and homeless shelters and things like that. It can be refrigerated and it's just a lot easier. And with 1 dose, you don't have to go back and do a second one. Again, in the studies, the Pfizer and Moderna showed around 95% efficacy after the second dose. However, again, you're dealing with completely different patient populations, countries, procedures and how they followed up, how they verified test results, everything. So it's really hard to say, I don't want that Johnson & Johnson vaccine because it was only 66% effective. We really don't know if it's worse because it's totally different studies. The other thing too is, let's say it is only 66% compared to 95%. That's still really good. You look at flu shots, some years it's only 19% effective.
Oh, wow.
But we do know with Johnson & Johnson, they did have some really good data. They showed that, I just happen to have a little table I put together for myself right here. They were able to show that it was 74% effective against asymptomatic infection, which the other 2 don't really have good data about asymptomatic infections. It was 85% effective against severe illness. And after 2 weeks, it was 93% effective at preventing hospitalizations. After 28 days, they had no hospitalizations or deaths from COVID.
Wow.
So really the main thing is that it keeps people from getting really sick or being in the hospital. And that's really the main things we want to prevent. So our feeling is any COVID vaccine is a good COVID vaccine. And so we hope that, if there's one available, you get it. And we really are worried that people will say, I don't want that one, I want the other one. And if we don't have the other one, what are we going to do? So
Right.
as Paul had mentioned, the first two are mRNA based. The second one uses a hijacked adenovirus to, it's all biology. It sounds kind of science fiction-y, but it works and it's safe. And these things actually have been studied for decades. And there's a ton of science behind them. It's not like they were just created last March and we have no data about their safety. So.
We also had a couple of questions about how long the vaccines will remain effective. Will we need booster shots or annual shots?
Probably
I'm
an
happy
ongoing
to take
study, who knows?
Greg, whoever wants to take that. So no one knows. There's a lot of suspicion.
I think the
flu
medical
shot.
folks are probably.
Yeah. Especially if there's a variant, it may again be like the flu shot where if there's enough of a change, there is a lot of suspicion that this virus will not go away. It'll be endemic, just like there's 4 other coronaviruses that are just always around. But if it does mutate enough, we might need a new vaccine. Again, similar to flu. Flu mutates a lot more frequently and dramatically than coronaviruses do. So hopefully, if we do, it won't be as often, and it won't take as long. It will be easier because we'll already be a few steps ahead of the process.
And I think that's some of the benefit of these new vaccine types, the mRNA vaccines or the adenovirus vaccines. Essentially, we're printing sequence that then you make the spike protein. So rather than vaccine manufacturers going through the entire process of trying to make the proteins or some other form, they're now just using bases, ATGC in a very specific sequence that then tells you how to make the vaccine or the antigen inside of yourself. It's super clever and super cool.
Wow.
Yeah,
Okay.
and this technology has been worked on for quite some time in a number of different organisms. We've looked at it in plants as well. Not as successful because plants have a pesky thing called the cell wall. More than infiltrate cells and get mRNAs into plants because of that brick wall around on the outside of them. But human cells, you just slapping them in a little bit of a lipid layer and in they go.
I remember that from botany class in high school. Are there certain people who shouldn't get a vaccine?
I think one of the questions was a mom that was having an allergic reaction to every shot she got. Of course, the risk out there definitely outweighs any benefit, especially with anaphylaxis like that. All the literature just says if you've had a anaphylaxis reaction to any of the components in the vaccine, don't get the shot. Well, how do you know? So if you've had a history of reaction with any vaccine, and we're talking about anaphylaxis, the question mentioned their throat swelling shut, which is definitely a bad thing. Others say, well, I have I got a sore arm, I reacted to the vaccine. Well, it's not really an anaphylaxis reaction. If all you get is a sore arm, well, you should get the vaccine. But if there's an anaphylaxis component, unfortunately, there's not a lot of options. You don't want to continually introduce your body to whatever it's reacting to. It's just going to get worse. So as far as who shouldn't get the vaccine, obviously there's another question about age. Maybe Dr. Morse could follow up on that. But if you're over 18 and you've never had an anaphylactic reaction to any of the components or any other vaccine, they're recommended to get one.
Yeah, we also had a question about folks with asthma. Is there any reaction with that?
So just to summarize, the only absolute contraindication is, like Greg said, allergy to a component. Pregnancy and breastfeeding, it's really, we don't expect there to be an issue, but it's one of those, talk with your doctor if the benefits outweigh any concerns you might have. There is no risk because of asthma from getting the shot. In fact, there's serious risk from being sick with COVID if you have asthma. So those are groups who really would highly encourage to get vaccinated. The only issue would be if there's people have concerns, if they have allergy or asthma, are they more likely to have an anaphylactic reaction? No, they're not. If you've had prior anaphylaxis, we talk to you about what you've had anaphylaxis to, and we usually have you wait an extra 15 minutes. We have you wait 30 minutes just to be safe. But, unless you've had anaphylaxis to one of the ingredients, there's no reason to not get vaccinated. With regards to why is this not approved in children under 18, it's because they weren't studied. For Moderna, it was studied down below to age 16, but with the other vaccines, it was not studied yet. But most of them have started studies, and we're really hopeful that it will be approved in younger ages later in the summer and the fall. Most of us are praying and hoping that it'll be before next school year starts, but we try not to hope too much in the future when it's anything COVID related, because we just get disappointed. But there are studies ongoing right now. So it's always difficult to experiment on kids. So you tend to start with kids. And grown-ups first. Same thing with pregnant women. So yeah.
I even heard, I think that they were starting up a database. If you didn't know you were pregnant and got the vaccine, that they're looking for folks who that might fit that bill. So again, it's about gathering data now. It's not, they're not recommending it out of a fear of consequences, but rather just because we don't know, because we don't have evidence for it, we're not going to comment on it, right?
And they have that for like the HPV vaccine and many other vaccines, that if you happen to get pregnant or happen to find out you were pregnant when you got vaccinated, because that way they can just follow and make sure, to add to the evidence, because again, they don't want to intentionally experiment on those groups. But if you just happen to have had that happen. So yes, you're correct.
Yeah, and I think with in terms of allergies to the ingredients, I think there was one ingredient in the Moderna vaccine. I think it was polyethylene glycol, PEG, one of the things that helps infiltrate cells, that reacted negatively with folks who had previous plastic surgeries or a particular type. Is that accurate?
Dermal fillers. So people who've had dermal fillers have had some unusual swelling. And so there's some discussion about what to do in those situations. And it's not necessarily a reason not to get vaccinated, but you may have some unusual swelling. I hadn't read that it was from the PEG necessarily, but I know that can be a reason. And it certainly could be. I just had read that dermal fillers might be a problem. So.
Yeah, I remember the dermal fillers. I don't, maybe I'm misremembering here on that. There's a lot of information on this.
Yeah.
So we had another question there. I was wondering if it was likely for COVID-19 to mutate to a degree where it would affect our pets. For the sake of Ziggy, everyone wants to know.
Yeah, so it already has. There have been several cases where dogs and cats have gotten infected. I believe zoo animals, lions, tigers. I think there's been sea lions. They had to put down millions of minks in New Zealand because it mutated. Oh. That was a huge mutation in New Zealand. And that mutation was found in the US and several other countries. So, this came from animals to infect us. And so it's probably not that surprising that there's been mutations where it's gone back. So there are some good resources on the CDC website that if you go into it, I think it's the first tab that it's, pretty clear that it's for the general public. And there's a little tab there that says about pets. So if you're sick, it talks to you about what you should do if you have pets. Mainly it's just isolate away from them if you can. It's really rare, but it can happen.
And then the same person asked about what are the strongest arguments we can use to convince others to get the vaccine?
It's a really tough one.
Yeah.
And I touched a little bit on that at the end. But I mean, I'll tell you now, I mean, that's, something that, not just psychologists are trying to study, but just multiple, levels, different levels of government organization. I'm sure you're familiar with this, Jennifer, trying to, get the right messaging out there to people, because there is just so much negativity. And as I said in my presentation, sort of shaming or kind of really getting into a confrontational argument with someone, that's not going to do it. So finding out why somebody is hesitant about getting a vaccination, you probably want to find out what that person's opinion is. And then if you're finding that there's misinformation in that opinion, gently lead them to more accurate information if you have the opportunity to do so. And then also be a positive example. So, if you're in favor of vaccination, you push that sort of message on Facebook. One of the things that psychologists are studying right now, you guys are probably familiar with whenever people go out and vote, they often have those "I just voted" stickers. And now on Facebook and other social media outlets, you're probably seeing where people are, taking pictures of themselves and hey, I just got vaccinated. It's kind of a similar idea where you have other people saying hey, I'm doing this, you should do it too. And so, sending positive messages and being a positive example in that respect could be helpful. But in terms of any one single argument, this is how you do it, I'm afraid I don't have that. I wish I did have the answer to that.
But that's really great, though, to say lead by example. We can all do that. We had a question also about the vaccine and autoimmune disorders. And I know we're getting past 8 o'clock here, but I think we should be able to finish up these few questions. And I want to say, if we don't get to your question for whatever reason, you're welcome to put your email address in the chat, and then I can forward the question on to our panelists and get an answer for you too. So that's always an option. But what about, is there any information about the vaccine and autoimmune disorders?
So not much yet. It's not contraindicated, but we warn people that it may not be as effective. But again, it wasn't a huge population. Most of them do have a little data for patients with HIV because there were a few of them in their studies. But again, it's just, there'll be more data, I'm sure, as there's more and more people vaccinated. But again, you should still get it. It just might not be as effective. And I'm sure you're probably used to hearing that if you hear someone with an autoimmune disorder. So.
Got it. And then this question is making me think of your chart that had the colored bars on it that was saying, when will the vaccine be available to me as a 20-year-old?
Yeah, just peeking at it again. It seemed to me it would be later in the summer at the earliest. But again, the way we've been going a bit faster through things, it's really hard to be certain. So,
sure.
So likely later summer into the fall, but fingers crossed sooner.
Yeah.
Do we have any idea when Michigan will be getting Johnson & Johnson doses?
Oh, I think tomorrow my health department's getting so I'm either today or tomorrow. So I'm pretty sure it was Thursday. So yeah, Monday, I think they got shipped out. It was right away. So
yeah, all this is happening super fast.
I know. Good thing
Yeah,
I said no to the votes, right? Or else they would have been in trouble.
Yeah.
that's so great. Well, hey, let's end on a positive note. We're getting the Johnson & Johnson vaccine. We're going to lead by example and get vaccinated. And yeah, and we've all learned so much. Thank you so much to our panelists for your time and for sharing your expertise. And thank you to our attendees for chiming in with your questions. This was absolutely fantastic and very much appreciated.
Thank you.
Thank you,
Thanks.
guys. Nice
Yeah.
to meet you guys, and thanks to all the students who came out. A couple of y'all in the audience. And again, if you guys do have questions beyond this, our West Shore emails are public. You're welcome to contact us. And I'm always happy to talk a little bit of biology. I think the vaccines, the technology is fascinating and super cool. And we'll see where this takes us, because this is not the end of mRNA vaccines in terms of stuff that they're going to try to tackle with it.
Sounds good. Yeah, like I said, feel free to leave your email or shoot me an email if you have any other questions. And yeah, thanks again. Have a great evening.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Bye.